Anyhow, okay, so moving on to today's lesson. I've got my teacher hat on today. So we're going to be talking about one of quantum physics' most fundamental and fascinating theories and principles. I mean, well, who am I kidding? They're all fascinating, really. But today I will be going over the quantum field theory, the uncertainty principle, as well as zero point or vacuum energy. Now, this is just a reminder that we all know that mass or matter, everything in our physical reality, is just very slow, compacted, clumped or stored vibrating energy. E equals mc squared, right? Matter and energy is essentially the same. It's all just moving or oscillating at different speeds. You, me, this microphone, your device that you're listening to me on, the sound waves in which this audio reaches you, or your ability to hear me through your ears are all made up of the same energy. All seemingly solid things in this world are made up of molecules and atoms, all vibrating, rotating, and oscillating. Now, inside of these particles are even smaller subatomic particles of energy, and this is what quantum physics, or quantum mechanics, studies. Now, I completely understand if you find quantum physics confusing. The language and the mathematics can be very, very complicated. So not everyone understands quantum physics, not even the mathematicians who actually study it either. But I love studying all things quantum physics. And I've always been able to understand it with a more, open mindset, I guess, as I can see how all of these subatomic particles that make up everything in our universe are connected to or correlate with so much of this expansion of consciousness work. And it's always my intention to explain quantum physics in the most simple and comprehensible way that I can. And I also love to connect the dots and tie in my own higher consciousness thoughts and ideas and downloads that I get with the fundamental knowings of quantum physics. So basically, quantum physics or quantum mechanics is just a way to explain life and physical reality through mathematics and physics. It explains things in our reality at a quantum level and is all about uncertainty and probabilities. However, much of quantum physics does not align with the traditional or classical Newtonian laws of physics. Now, it doesn't mean that quantum physics isn't valid or that it's wrong. It just means that our current Newtonian classical physics laws are perhaps not all there is to life and reality and how it all works. Now, many theories in quantum physics have been tested countless times, and many of these quantum physics theories may seem weird or impossible, and they may go against the Newtonian laws of physics. But the thing is that these quantum physics theories work, and like it or not, physicists and scientists have come to learn to accept that these weird predictions and probabilities and theories, well, that they're just true. So first, to start off, I'm going to explain the quantum field theory. So everything that you see is thought to be made up of particles. This is what most people are taught in science class. The only problem is that it's not true. And physicists have known this for decades. You see, particles are really not fundamental. The best theory in physics tells us there really are no particles at all, only fields, and that particles are merely just waves in the fields. Mind-blowing, I know. So these wave fields, so these wave functions, is what really exists. Now, what's known as wave-particle duality refers to both light and matter behaving as both particles and waves. A particle is created when you measure or observe the electron wave. And I've talked about this notion in previous episodes, and one example of measuring or observing a wave or a particle is demonstrated in the double-slit experiment and the observer effect, where findings from this experiment shows us that the particle can also behave as a wave state. And the very act alone of consciously observing it or measuring it with some sort of device in some way collapses the wave into a particle. So particles can also behave as waves, and the act of observing it or becoming conscious of it changes its behavior. Now, to go a little more deeper into this, what's happening is that the particle is essentially everywhere at the same time, as a wave of probable locations. This wave is a set of pure probabilities or potentialities of where the particle could be found if an observation was made. Pretty cool, hey? So particles act as waves and remain in a state of all probabilities and potentialities. So quantum entities or energies are things that might be or might happen, rather than things that are for certain. This truth that a quantum entity or energy exists in multiple possible realities is called superposition. So as soon as an observation or a measurement is made, the superposition becomes an actual reality, or the wave function collapses. And think about how you could apply this quantum physics knowledge to your own life, and how all of the potentialities of your life could exist or be possible, as this is what quantum physics suggests, and how becoming more conscious, or just the very act of being conscious in a moment, could create a particular outcome. At any given moment, everything in your reality, your life, contains unlimited futures or possibilities that can become real, that can manifest. But the reality that manifests or becomes real is the one that you pay the most attention to. So this is exactly the reason why I bang on so much about where your attention and your focus is, and is why it's so important to become aware of the underlying motivations behind your actions or behind the majority of your thoughts, where they stem from. As your unconscious underlying motivations is also you unconsciously directing your attention or focus. So you need to become conscious of these motivations that are possibly fueled by your fears or limiting beliefs, for example. As at a quantum level, as well as at a physical matter level, you are creating your reality with your attention and your focus. So that's why I always talk about deactivating the amount of power that you have in your fears and your limiting beliefs that may be driving or motivating certain actions or thoughts. And I love to think of Max Planck's quote, who's a German physicist from the early 1900s that actually discovered the energy quanta. And he quotes, "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change." So fundamentally, quantum physics tells us that reality is different when you measure it or observe it versus when you don't. Reality and physical manifestations change when you're conscious as opposed to being unconscious about things. Anyhow, so far we know that a particle has a location, but a field is spread out everywhere. So ordinary space is actually full of fields with subatomic particles. So it's the wave function of these fields is what really exists. And when you observe the electron or the proton or the photon or any particle, you don't see the wave function, as the act of observing it or measuring it collapses the wave function. So the wave changes or resolves into individual packets of energy, and these are particles. So every particle in the universe is a teeny tiny ripple in these fields, and then are molded into a particle, whereby then the particles clump together in similar frequencies and make up mass or matter, or anything in our reality. Fields are fluid-like substances that can vibrate and experience different excitations. But what exactly are fields? So mathematically speaking, a field is something that takes a value at every point in space. So for example, if you have a fireplace in a room, then the temperature at every point in that room would have a value. So this would be a field of temperature. Now, even though fields are not made up of any substances that physicists know of, they're still considered to be real and physical. And this is because they exist in a space and they have energy. And their properties can be calculated and accurately predicted in experiments. So the vacuum space is alive with these fluid-like fields. Now, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle means that a quantum field cannot sit still. Instead, they're vibrating and change their values over time. So everything that you can see in this world is really only made up of the excitations of 4 of the fields. There's electromagnetic fields, electron fields, up quarks, and down quark fields. But there are also more too, and so far there's roughly about 17 fields that we know of. Even space-time itself is thought to be a field, but so far no one has been able to incorporate this into the quantum field theory. Now, for all of you visually minded listeners out there, one way to imagine or visualize the fields is to imagine the volume of the universe being filled with about 17 of these different kinds of fields that are all different colours, or different coloured fluids, let's just say, of some kind. A really interesting thing to note about one of these fields, the space-time field, is that in Einstein's theory of general relativity, it replaced space with space-time, which is a field that pervades all of reality. So basically, in order for a force to spread and affect other things over distances, it has to also affect its field locally. And then it spreads, or rather affects, from that local point to a more distant point, where ultimately it's affecting the local field at that distant point. And what's cool is this can happen over vast, vast distances. But for an example, when you call someone, let's just say on your phone, you're putting excitations in a field and affecting the electronics within the cell phone of the person that you're calling. And, this prompts me to think about the static and audible variances that I've had in my recordings lately. Was the energetic frequency of my higher self, or my guides, for example, perhaps affecting the fields within my audio recordings? Manifesting as a static or interruptions in my audio. And we can also take this notion and think about how it is that our own energetic frequencies that we emit can affect the energetic frequencies of other things, other possibilities, therefore changing or affecting things in our reality. This may possibly be one of the connections in how events or circumstances can manifest, as we know that we attract events, circumstances, people, or things in our lives that match the energetic frequency that we embody. Does this possibly explain how our efforts in doing the work affect our local energetic fields, and so therefore also then affects the energetic fields of some possible manifestation, therefore connecting us to it and attracting it to us? So anyhow, moving on. So quantum field theory tells us that the excitations of fields happen only in kind of like chunks or clumps of energy, where the energy of the wave is determined by the mass of the particle. So the bigger the mass, the more atoms and subatomic particles there are that have clumped together by similar frequencies, hence resulting in these clumps having more energy. So these clumps or chunks of energy are what forms everything, from very, very tiny, small or quantum things like a quark to larger things like a table or a person or a planet. Basically everything in our reality that's observable or even non-observable too. It's really cool to think about all of the electrons and quantum particles in my body that are waves in the same field. And the field is fundamental, whereas the electrons are not. And what's also cool to think about is what's called the up quark and the down quark fields, where all of the atoms in your body are composed of particles which are just ripples in these fields, and is the same fields that you and me and everyone on this earth is in. And not to mention all of the other planets and the sun is in too. It's just one continuous field in which everyone and everything in this universe is connected to and is a part of. It makes no difference in what things these chunks of energies form, a person or an apple, a house or a planet. And in my opinion, and from the knowledge that I get from my higher self, I suspect that these atoms and chunks of energies form by similar frequencies in the quantum field, as well as through the law of attraction, where similar frequencies attract one another. Now, all of these known fields have something that is called zero-point energy, or also known as vacuum energy. So within the quantum fields, there is also known as the quantum vacuum state, or quantum energy, or zero-point energy. There's different names for the same thing. And this is the quantum state that has the lowest possible energy. So, within a quantum field, there can be excitable states of these clumping particles, and then there can also be more grounded states, which is known as the true vacuum state, or the ground state, or zero-point field, or zero-point state. So many different terms. So as much as fields can have excited states, all fields also have zero-point energy states. Just like us, we can be in an excited or highly charged state of energy, and then we can be in a more grounded and calmer state of energy. Now, zero-point or vacuum energy generally is known to contain no physical particles. Its value is zero or near zero, as it has the lowest possible energy value. However, according to quantum physics, the vacuum state, or the zero-point field, is not truly empty, but instead contains fleeting electromagnetic waves and particles, known as quarks, that pop in and out of the quantum field. In and out of existence, almost magically. Pretty cool, hey? These tiny particles that fluctuate in zero-point energy, that seem to magically pop in and out of existence, is the key behind how such divine, synchronistic, and seemingly magical manifestations can occur. These atoms and subatomic particles seem to move through barriers almost impossibly or magically, and in quantum physics, this is known as quantum tunneling. But honestly, this notion of quantum tunneling needs a whole other episode on its own, so I'll just leave it there. Now, what's really interesting about these particles, these subatomic particles and atoms and whatnot within the zero-point field or energy, is that the more that we try to accurately determine the position of each particle, the less accurately you can determine its momentum. And so hence, this is what causes the fluctuations and is also known as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So in basic terms, the uncertainty principle tells us how well you can or cannot know things, or how well you can and cannot measure things. This is a feature of the quantum world that's absent in the world of standard classical Newtonian physics. It's almost like the fuzziness of not being able to determine things like we can in the classical world of physics. In the uncertainty principle, for example, we can know the position of a wave, but we don't know the wavelength or the momentum of it. Or we may know the wavelength or the momentum of it, but not the position. And this same principle applies to wavelengths, position, and time. So we can't know both simultaneously. And if we apply this notion to a real-world example of what we know in our everyday lives, well, it basically describes how we cannot predict or know the outcome of anything that is to happen or manifest in the future with 100% accuracy. So what this uncertainty principle also tells us is that zero-point energy exists, and even at absolute zero, atoms and molecules always retain some vibrational motion. So all quantum mechanical systems, including quantum fields, undergo fluctuations, even in their ground state. So this results in motion even at absolute zero. And we see many examples of this in our real world, like how liquid helium doesn't freeze under atmospheric pressure, regardless of its temperature. So this is due to its 0-point energy. Now, this 0-point energy is theorized to be very, very powerful. Physicists Richmond Feynman and John Wheeler calculated that the 0-point radiation of the vacuum is to be an order of magnitude greater than nuclear energy, with a single light bulb containing enough energy to boil all of the world's oceans. Yet, according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, any such energy would gravitate, and the experimental evidence from both the expansion of the universe, dark energy, and the Casimir effect show that any such energy would be exceptionally weak. So it's a bit of a paradox, or there's very contradicting views as to how this energy works exactly and how powerful it may or may not be. Basically, physics currently lacks a full theoretical model for understanding 0-point energy. And so far, no one has been able to show a theory where 0-point cancellations occur in the low-energy universe that we observe today. And this discrepancy is known as the cosmological constant problem. And it's one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in physics. But many physicists believe that the vacuum, or the 0-point energy, holds the key to a full understanding of nature. But when I think about this vacuum energy or this 0-point energy, in my own personal experience and understandings, harnessing 0-point energy through consciousness work results in some pretty powerful and magical manifestations. But what is also really cool about 0-point energy is that these tiny fluctuating particles generate energy in which we could possibly harness to create free 0-point energy. And according to the calculations in quantum field theory, the vacuum space holds an infinite amount of this powerful 0-point energy. And as I share this, this concept brings a memory to mind. And it was, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. It was sometime when I was working in the metaphysical shop where I'd met a man who had some very, very interesting messages to share with me one day, that happened a lot when I worked there. But he was a very interesting older man, and we struck up a conversation about his recent journeys traveling down south, where he'd been a part of an archaeological expedition to some pyramids down in Mexico and down in South America, and that he'd actually worked with one of the 13 Mayan crystal skulls, which was a really cool synchronicity because I was having some very weird things going on with crystal skulls at that time. Anyhow, he had many, that'll have to be a story for another day. It's too much. But he had many fascinating stories and some really awesome pictures of the expedition that he was on, including pictures of these rare skulls and various Mayan ceremonies. And we both shared stories of our journeys down south and our connection to the ancient wisdom of the Mayans, because at that time I had recently just backpacked around that area myself, and also had some very interesting spiritual experiences down there too. So the timing of meeting this man and having this conversation was very divine. Anyhow, what really caught my attention, however, was his mutual love of quantum physics and how he'd been working on a project that harnessed 0-point energy to create free energy. And I remember him stating that he was really nervous about exploring his invention or the invention that he was working on with a few other people, as free energy is not something that the governments or the world's elites would want. As, we all know how much oil and energy controls the world. So I know and do follow many people that have been able to create devices and ways to harness 0 point energy, but also know that it's kind of a sketchy area because this is something that the world, although we need, is not ready for, and in which the current systems and governments in place would not allow. I mean, think about it. This would mean that we could completely bypass more renewable sources of energy too, like solar or wind or even wave power or energy. I mean, I do believe at some point this is the future that we will create and manifest. However, it's just not the right time right now. In the collective level of consciousness that the world elites and governments are at, they're still very stuck in the level of consciousness that is so focused on control and power and greed. So 0 point free energy for the world isn't exactly what they would want to endorse right now. But I really feel like we will eventually get there. Anyhow, since then I've always followed and come across different people that have been able to create devices and ways to harness this 0 point energy or free energy. And I just find it so fascinating. Now, moving on. So in my own personal experience and opinion, as I stated before, this powerful 0 point energy can be accessed by us via our consciousness. In fact, many of you already use it every day. It's just one of the side effects or a natural part of spiritually awakening and consciously growing or evolving. This state or energetic frequency is what we embody, where seemingly magical things can manifest almost divinely. So you can think of these random subatomic particles that just seem to break through barriers and pop in and out of existence almost magically, right? You can think of that happening on a quantum level and see how it manifests outside of you into our reality, where random events or circumstances magically manifest in the most amazing way possible. But for more on all of that, you will have to wait until next week's episode, as this episode will be way too long. But you can think of all the experiences that I had that magically synced up and manifested on my walkabout that I shared with you guys a couple of weeks ago. This was me tapping into and harnessing 0 point energy. So in next week's episode, I'm going to explain how 0 point energy is used in manifesting, how it's a part of spiritual or conscious expansion. And I'm also going to share a pretty big or important message about how humanity is evolving into accessing more of this 0 point energy, and exactly how and why it is that we're collectively going to be moving away from relying on polarities or duality or extreme events and manifestations as a way for us to achieve more balance. Because that's the old paradigm. That's what we have been and still are doing or relying on right now to create change, to create more balance. But in the new paradigm that we are on the cusp of, we're not going to rely on extremities and duality to create more balance anymore. There's a very different world and way of being that humanity is going to be collectively creating and manifesting and moving into. And this new reality will require us to feed into less division. It'll require us to force less, to fight less. And it'll require us to have more ease, more flow, abundance, and balance. I've been itching to share everything and all the information and all the awarenesses and all the things with you for some time. I get so excited about it all. But, I've spent many months sharing other information first, as it's important to understand where we are coming from, to become more conscious of just how it is that we've been used to operating in the old paradigm. As it's really important to understand it all and integrate the lessons of what we've learned from that old way, how we've been creating our world, what we've been manifesting, and what continues to collectively manifest as a result. As it's only from fully embodying the lessons from that and fully acknowledging it and understanding it all, where we can then move in a more sustainable way into the new frequency and the newness of the new world that we're going to create. And now, before I end this episode, I really just feel like it's important to note that it's totally okay if you don't feel drawn to quantum physics. And please don't feel like you need to understand things that are going on at a quantum level. I just love sharing these concepts and truth with you, as it's a passion of mine. It's my love and my joy. And sharing it also helps to further confirm the workings of the universe for some people. That what is manifesting and going on in your reality outside of you actually all starts from within. From the subatomic quantum particles that quite literally make up our entire universe and the realities of the future you can choose to create. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Please feel free to share it with anyone that may be interested in quantum physics or how consciousness works on a subatomic particle level. Don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter each week, where you can have each episode emailed to you. And I don't know, I always write a few little bit extra things here and there in my emails. And don't forget, you can follow me on Instagram too. The links are in the show notes. Oh, and if you want some further information about quantum physics, I've also linked a few videos in the show notes too. I hope you have a great week, everyone, and I'll talk to you all next week. Well, that's it for today, guys. And if you like today's episode, please like and follow us on our socials. Share this podcast with friends, and why not leave this podcast a review? Oh, and hang out an extra minute if you want some high vibe laughs. Oh, there's so many great quantum physics jokes and puns out there, but some of them you'd have to research, because I'm like, what? I don't get that, which is probably part of the joke, because that's quantum physics for you. This one's silly, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. I was watching a really good documentary about quantum physics the other day, but I decided to stop watching in case I affected the outcome.